Yes, the historical period during which the American and French revolutions occurred is commonly referred to as the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. It emphasized reason, individualism, and skepticism of traditional doctrines. Enlightenment thinkers sought to apply the principles of scientific reasoning to all aspects of life, including politics, religion, and society. The concept of the nation-state, a form of political organization in which a distinct nation is represented by a singular sovereign government, was significantly shaped and influenced by the events of the American and French revolutions. Here's how these two revolutions contributed to the understanding and evolution of the nation-state. American Revolution. 1. Independence and sovereignty. The American Revolution established the principle that a colony could assert its right to self-determination and break away from a colonial power to form an independent nation. The United States became one of the first modern nation-states to emerge from colonial rule. 2. Democratic governance. The revolution led to the creation of the U.S. Constitution, which outlined a government based on democratic principles and the rule of law. This included the separation of powers, checks and balances, and the protection of individual rights, setting a precedent for future nation-states. 3. National identity. The American Revolution fostered a sense of national identity among the colony's diverse populations. The shared struggle for independence and the ideals enshrined in the Declaration of Independence helped unify the people under a common national identity. French Revolution. 1. Sovereignty of the people. The French Revolution emphasized the idea that sovereignty resides with the people rather than with a monarch. This was a fundamental shift from the divine right of kings to popular sovereignty, which became a cornerstone of the modern nation-state. 2. Nationalism. The revolution stimulated a strong sense of nationalism. The idea of the nation as a collective entity with shared values and culture was promoted. The concept of la patrie, the fatherland, became central, encouraging citizens to identify with and fight for their nation. 3. Citizenship and rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen articulated universal principles of citizenship and human rights. These ideas influenced the development of the nation-state by emphasizing equality before the law and the rights of citizens. 4. Centralized state. The revolution led to the reorganization of France into a centralized state with uniform laws and administrative practices. This model of a centralized nation-state with a strong sense of national unity and standardized governance influenced other countries. Combined impact on the concept of the nation-state. Self-determination. Both revolutions underscored the principle that a nation has the right to self-determination. This idea later influenced various independence movements around the world. 2. Constitutionalism. The adoption of written constitutions in the United States and France provided a model for other nations, emphasizing the importance of a formal, legal framework for governance. 3. National identity and unity. The revolutions promoted the idea that a nation is more than just a territory. It is a community of people with shared values, culture, and identity. This concept of national unity became essential to the modern nation-state. 4. Popular sovereignty and republicanism. The shift from monarchical to popular sovereignty and the establishment of republics based on the will of the people became key characteristics of the nation-state. These principles were adopted and adapted by many countries in their quest for national self-governance. In summary, the American and French revolutions played crucial roles in the evolution of the nation-state by promoting ideas of independence, democratic governance, national identity, popular sovereignty, and centralized statehood. These revolutions laid the groundwork for the modern understanding of the nation-state as a political entity characterized by self-determination, constitutional governance, and national unity.
Ano to? Lalaki mo pa ito sa ano? Eh, mano-mano pa. Mano-mano pa.
The concept of the nation-state, a form of political organization in which a distinct nation is represented by a singular sovereign government, was significantly. The ideas associated with the American and French revolutions and their contribution to the concept of the nation-state are both reflective of the thoughts and aspirations of many people at the time and influenced by later ideological interpretations. Here's a more nuanced view of this dynamic. American Revolution. 1. Liberty and independence. Many American colonists genuinely sought liberty from British rule, motivated by perceived injustices like taxation without representation and the desire for self-governance. The rhetoric of liberty and individual rights was widely disseminated through pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense and the Declaration of Independence, reflecting popular sentiments. Constitutional government. The framers of the Constitution, influenced by Enlightenment thinkers, aimed to create a government based on principles of checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism. The Federalist Papers and debates during the Constitutional Convention illustrate that many leaders were deeply invested in these ideas. French Revolution. 1. Sovereignty of the people. The revolution was driven by widespread discontent with the ancient regime, economic hardship, and the influence of Enlightenment ideas promoting equality and individual rights. The Estates General and later the National Assembly were platforms for debating and enacting these ideas, showing that many participants believed in popular sovereignty. 2. Nationalism. Nationalist sentiments grew during the revolution, especially as France faced external threats. The revolutionary government fostered a sense of national unity and identity. The Revolutionary Wars and the Levée en masse, mass conscription, were both causes and effects of rising nationalism, ideological accretion, and meta-historical interpretations. 1. Post-revolutionary narratives. Over time, the narratives of the American and French revolutions were shaped and sometimes idealized to fit broader ideological frameworks. Historians, politicians, and intellectuals in the 19th and 20th centuries often emphasized certain aspects of the revolutions to support their own ideological positions, such as the spread of democracy and national self-determination. 2. Construction of national identity. Both revolutions became foundational myths for their respective nations, with later generations interpreting and reinterpreting revolutionary ideals to suit contemporary needs. In the United States, the notion of the American experiment in democracy became central to national identity, while in France, the revolution's principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity were enshrined in the national consciousness. 3. Academic and intellectual analysis. Scholars have analyzed the revolutions from various perspectives, including Marxist, liberal, and conservative viewpoints, each emphasizing different elements of the revolutionary experiences. These interpretations have contributed to a more complex and sometimes conflicting understanding of the revolution's impact on the concept of the nation-state. Conclusion. While many of the ideas associated with the American and French revolutions were genuinely held and acted upon by people at the time, the full ideological framework we recognize today has been shaped by subsequent interpretations and ideological constructions. The meta-historical narrative that links these events to the development of the modern nation-state includes both the immediate thoughts and actions of the participants and the evolving interpretations by later generations. The ideas associated with the American and French revolutions and their contribution to the concept of the nation-state are both reflective of the thoughts and aspirations of many people at the time and influenced by later ideological interpretations. Here's a more nuanced view of this dynamic. American Revolution. 1. Liberty and independence. Many American colonists genuinely sought liberty from British rule, motivated by perceived injustices like taxation without representation and the desire for self-governance. The rhetoric of liberty and individual rights was widely disseminated through pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense and the Declaration of Independence, reflecting popular sentiments. Constitutional government. The framers of the Constitution, influenced by Enlightenment thinkers, aimed to create a government based on principles of checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism. The Federalist Papers and debates during the Constitutional Convention illustrate that many leaders were deeply invested in these ideas. French Revolution. 1. Sovereignty of the people. The revolution was driven by widespread discontent with the ancient regime, economic hardship, and the influence of Enlightenment ideas promoting equality and individual rights. The Estates General and later the National Assembly were platforms for debating and enacting these ideas, showing that many participants believed in popular sovereignty. 2. Nationalism. Nationalist sentiments grew during the revolution, especially as France faced external threats. The revolutionary government fostered a sense of national unity and identity. The Revolutionary Wars and the Levée en masse, mass conscription, were both causes and effects of rising nationalism, ideological accretion, and meta-historical interpretations. 1. Post-revolutionary narratives. Over time, the narratives of the American and French revolutions were shaped and sometimes idealized to fit broader ideological frameworks. Historians, politicians, and intellectuals in the 19th and 20th centuries often emphasized certain aspects of the revolutions to support their own ideological positions, such as the spread of democracy and national self-determination. 2. Construction of national identity. Both revolutions became foundational myths for their respective nations, with later generations interpreting the relationship between the concepts of the American and French revolutions, the evolution of the nation-state, and the contemporary conflict between Ukraine and Russia involves understanding the principles of national self-determination, sovereignty, and nationalism that emerged from these historical events. Here's how these ideas are relevant to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. National self-determination and sovereignty. American and French revolutions. Both revolutions emphasized the right of people to self-governance and sovereignty, rejecting external control and advocating for the creation of independent nation-states based on popular consent. The idea that a nation has the right to determine its own political status and pursue its own economic, social, and cultural development was a key outcome of these revolutions. Ukraine's struggle for independence and sovereignty echoes these principles. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine declared independence and sought to establish itself as a sovereign nation-state. The desire for self-determination is reflected in Ukraine's efforts to align more closely with Western institutions like the European Union and NATO, which contrasts with Russian influence. Nationalism and identity. American and French revolutions. The development of a national identity was crucial in both revolutions. In America, a sense of national unity was fostered among the colonies, while in France, revolutionary nationalism sought to unify diverse groups under the banner of the French Republic. Nationalism became a powerful force for uniting people and legitimizing new forms of government. Ukraine. Ukraine has a strong sense of national identity that has been further solidified in the face of external threats. The ongoing conflict with Russia has intensified Ukrainian nationalism and the desire to protect its sovereignty. The conflict involves not just territorial disputes, but also issues of cultural and national identity, with Ukraine asserting its distinctiveness from Russia. Conflict and international response. American and French revolutions. Both revolutions had significant international implications, influencing global politics and leading to conflicts with other nations. The American Revolution inspired other independence movements, while the French Revolution led to wars across Europe. The international response to these revolutions ranged from support to opposition, reflecting the broader ideological and geopolitical landscape. Ukraine-Russia conflict. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia has similarly drawn international attention and involvement. Western countries have generally supported Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, providing economic, military, and diplomatic assistance. Russia, on the other hand, views Ukraine as within its sphere of influence and has acted to prevent Ukraine from fully integrating with Western institutions. Principles of international law. American and French revolutions. The principles of self-determination and national sovereignty that emerged from these revolutions have influenced the development of international law. The idea that nations have the right to self-determination is enshrined in the United Nations Charter and other international agreements. Ukraine-Russia conflict. The conflict raises important questions about international law, particularly regarding sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right to self-determination. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its support for separatist movements in eastern Ukraine are seen by many as violations of these principles. Summary. The American and French revolutions contributed foundational ideas about national self-determination, sovereignty, and nationalism that continue to influence global politics. In the context of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, these principles are at the forefront as Ukraine seeks to assert its independence and national identity against Russian actions that are perceived as undermining its sovereignty. The conflict is a contemporary example of the ongoing relevance of these revolutionary principles in shaping the international order and the struggles of nations to define their own destinies. The relationship between the concepts of the American and French revolutions, the evolution of the nation-state, and the contemporary conflict between Ukraine and Russia involves understanding the principles of national self-determination, sovereignty, and nationalism that emerged from these historical events. Here's how these ideas are relevant to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. National self-determination and sovereignty. American and French revolutions. Both revolutions emphasized the right of people to self-governance and sovereignty, rejecting external control and advocating for the creation of independent nation-states based on popular consent. The Russian Revolution and the ideological legacy of the Soviet Union are indeed crucial to understanding the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Here's a detailed analysis of how these historical and ideological contexts relate to the present situation. The Russian Revolution and Soviet legacy. 1. Russian Revolution, 1917. The Russian Revolution led to the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and the establishment of the Soviet Union, a state founded on Marxist-Leninist principles. The revolution had a profound impact on the structure and ideology of the state, emphasizing centralized control, collectivism, and the spread of communist ideology. 2. Formation of the Soviet Union. After the revolution, the Soviet Union was formed in 1922, incorporating multiple republics, including Ukraine. The Soviet Union's borders and administrative divisions were established under this regime, with Moscow exerting control over the constituent republics. Number 3. Dissolution of the Soviet Union, 1991. The collapse of the Soviet Union resulted in the independence of its constituent republics, including Ukraine. The dissolution led to significant political, economic, and social upheaval in the region. The newly independent states faced the challenge of building new national identities and political systems. Post-Soviet Russia and Ukraine. 1. Independence and national identity. Ukraine, like other former Soviet republics, sought to establish a distinct national identity separate from Russia. This included efforts to align more closely with Western Europe and institutions such as the European Union and NATO. 2. Russia's geopolitical strategy. Under Vladimir Putin, Russia has pursued a strategy of reasserting influence over its near abroad, the term often used to describe the former Soviet republics. This strategy is partly driven by a desire to restore Russia's great power status and counter Western influence in the region. 3. Putin's ideological stance. While Putin is not strictly a communist, his approach reflects a blend of nationalism, authoritarianism, and a nostalgic view of Soviet-era influence and territorial integrity. Putin has expressed the view that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a major geopolitical disaster and has sought to restore Russia's influence over former Soviet territories. Ukraine-Russia conflict. 1. Annexation of Crimea, 2014. Russia's annexation of Crimea was justified by Putin as a response to the perceived threat of Ukraine moving closer to the West, particularly after the 2014 Euromaidan protests and the ousting of the pro-Russian Ukrainian president. The annexation was widely condemned by the international community as a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. 2. Eastern Ukraine conflict. The conflict in eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Donbas region, has been marked by Russian support for separatist movements. This support is seen as part of Russia's broader strategy to destabilize Ukraine and prevent its full integration with Western institutions. 3. Current conflict, 2022 present. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022 can be seen as an extension of this strategy. It reflects Russia's desire to reassert control over Ukraine and to prevent it from becoming a fully independent and Western-aligned state. The war is framed by Russia as a fight against Western encroachment and a defense of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine. Conclusion. The Russian Revolution and the ideological foundations of the Soviet Union are integral to understanding the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The dissolution of the Soviet Union left a legacy of contested borders, national identities, and geopolitical rivalries. Vladimir Putin's policies and actions can be seen as an attempt to restore some aspects of the Soviet Union's territorial influence, even if not its communist ideology. The conflict is rooted in a complex interplay of history, ideology, national identity, and geopolitical strategy, reflecting the enduring impact of the Soviet legacy on the region. Yes, the Russian Revolution contributed significantly to the understanding of the nation-state, particularly through its impact on ideology, governance, and international relations. Here are the key ways in which the Russian Revolution influenced the concept of the nation-state. Ideological contributions. 1. Communist ideology. The Russian Revolution established the first socialist state, grounded in Marxist-Leninist ideology. This challenged the traditional capitalist and liberal democratic models of the nation-state. It introduced the idea of a state governed by the working class and aimed at abolishing private property and class distinctions. 2. Concept of the Vanguard Party. Lenin's concept of the Vanguard Party, a highly disciplined party to lead the proletariat to revolution, influenced the structure and function of the Soviet state. This introduced a new model of governance, where the state was tightly controlled by a single party with a revolutionary agenda. Hashar, political and governance contributions. 1. Centralized control. The Soviet Union implemented a highly centralized form of governance, with the Communist Party holding all power. This contrasted with decentralized or federal models of governance seen in many nation-states. The state apparatus was used to control all aspects of life, including the economy, education, and culture. 2. Soviet federalism. The Soviet Union was a federation of republics, each supposedly having a degree of autonomy, but in practice, all were controlled by the central government in Moscow. This model influenced how multi-ethnic and multinational states could be structured, although the autonomy of the republics was more theoretical than real. International relations and influence. Export of revolution. The Soviet Union sought to export its revolutionary ideals worldwide, supporting communist parties and movements in other countries. This had a significant impact on international relations and the concept of the nation-state, leading to the establishment of other socialist states and the spread of communist ideology. 2. Cold War dynamics. The bipolar world order during the Cold War, with the US and the USSR as superpowers, shaped the development and understanding of nation-states. The ideological conflict between capitalism and communism influenced the internal and external policies of many states, leading to various forms of governance and alliances. National identity and ethnic relations. 1. Nationalities policy. The Soviet Union's nationalities policy aimed to manage the diverse ethnic groups within its borders. It promoted the idea of Soviet identity alongside ethnic identities. This policy influenced how modern nation-states handle ethnic diversity and national identity, though often through coercive and repressive means. Creation of new states. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 led to the emergence of multiple independent nation-states, each with its own national identity and governance structures. This process illustrated the challenges of nation-building and the transition from a multinational empire to independent nation-states. Contributions to the concept of the nation-state. 1. Alternative model. The Soviet Union provided an alternative model of the nation-state, based on centralized control, single-party rule, and socialist principles. This model influenced various countries, particularly during the 20th century. 2. Impact on state sovereignty. The principle of state sovereignty was challenged and redefined through the lens of communist internationalism. The USSR's for revolutionary movements often conflicted with traditional notions of sovereignty and non-interference. Conclusion. The Russian Revolution significantly contributed to the understanding and evolution of the nation-state by introducing new ideological, political, and governance models. It challenged existing capitalist and democratic frameworks, offered an alternative vision of state control and national identity, and influenced international relations. The legacy of the Soviet Union continues to impact contemporary notions of statehood, sovereignty, and governance. Yes, the Arab Spring was a series of revolutionary uprisings and protests that began in late 2010 and swept across many Arab countries. These movements aimed at challenging authoritarian regimes and demanding political, economic, and social reforms. While the Arab Spring shared some characteristics with earlier revolutions, it also had unique aspects specific to the modern era and the Arab world. Key aspects of the Arab Spring. 1. Origins and causes. Economic hardship. High unemployment, rising food prices, and widespread poverty fueled discontent among the population. Political repression. Long-standing authoritarian regimes with little political freedom or opportunity for opposition led to frustration and a desire for change. Social media. The use of social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter played a crucial role in organizing protests and spreading information quickly. 2. Major uprisings. Tunisia. The self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi in December 2010 sparked protests that led to the ousting of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali in January 2011. Egypt. Protests in Tahrir Square led to the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak in February 2011. Libya. Armed conflict resulted in the overthrow and death of Muammar Gaddafi in October 2011. Syria. Protests evolved into a brutal civil war that continues to this day. 3. Outcomes. Tunisia. The country made significant strides towards democratization, adopting a new constitution and holding free elections. Egypt. Initial gains were followed by political instability, a brief period of Islamist rule, and eventually a military coup leading to a new authoritarian regime under President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Libya and Syria. Both countries descended into prolonged conflict, with Libya experiencing factional violence and Syria suffering a devastating civil war. 4. Impact on the region. The Arab Spring had a profound impact on the Middle East and North Africa, leading to significant political changes, ongoing conflicts, and a re-examination of governance and human rights in the region. It also influenced other movements and protests around the world, highlighting the power of social media and grassroots mobilization. Comparison with other revolutions. 1. Similarities with historical revolutions. Demand for change. Like the American, French, and Russian revolutions, the Arab Spring was driven by popular demands for political and social change. Mass mobilization. Large-scale protests and the involvement of diverse social groups were common features. Challenge to authority. All these revolutions involved challenging established authorities and seeking to establish new forms of governance. 2. Differences. Use of technology. The Arab Spring was notable for its use of modern technology, particularly social media, to organize and communicate. Regional spread. Unlike many historical revolutions confined to a single country, the Arab Spring affected multiple countries simultaneously. Mixed outcomes. While some historical revolutions led to relatively stable new regimes, e.g. the American Revolution, the outcomes of the Arab Spring were highly varied, with some countries achieving democratic reforms and others experiencing ongoing conflict. Conclusion. The Arab Spring was indeed a series of revolutions that aimed to overthrow authoritarian regimes and demand greater political freedom and social justice. It shared many characteristics with historical revolutions, but also had unique features specific to the contemporary Arab world and the digital age. The Arab Spring significantly influenced the political landscape of the Middle East and North Africa, demonstrating both the potential and the challenges of revolutionary movements in the modern era. Yes, the Velvet Revolution was a significant event in Central Europe that played a crucial role in the collapse of the Soviet Union's influence in the region. It is one of several peaceful revolutions that occurred during the late 1980s and early 1990s, leading to the end of communist rule in Central and Eastern Europe. Here's an overview of the Velvet Revolution and its context within the broader collapse of the Soviet Union. Velvet Revolution, 1989. 1. Background. Location. Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Historical context. The Velvet Revolution occurred against the backdrop of increasing dissatisfaction with communist rule and the liberalizing reforms initiated by Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, such as glasnost, openness, and perestroika restructuring. 2. Key events. Protests begin. On November 17, 1989, a student demonstration in Prague was violently suppressed by the police, sparking widespread protests. Mass mobilization. Over the following days and weeks, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets, demanding political reforms and the end of communist rule. Negotiations and transition. The communist government, facing overwhelming public pressure and a lack of support from the Soviet Union, entered into negotiations with opposition leaders. Resignation and new government. On December 10, 1989, President Gustav Husak appointed a new government led by non-communists and then resigned. Václav Havel, a former dissident and playwright, was elected president on December 29, 1989. 3. Outcomes. End of communist rule. The Velvet Revolution led to the peaceful end of communist rule in Czechoslovakia. Democratic transition. The country transitioned to a democratic political system, holding free elections and implementing market reforms. Peaceful separation. In 1993, Czechoslovakia peacefully split into two independent countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Broader context. Collapse of the Soviet Union. 1. Gorbachev's reforms. Glasnost and Perestroika. Gorbachev's policies of openness and restructuring aimed to modernize the Soviet economy and make the political system more transparent and responsive. Unintended consequences. These reforms unintentionally weakened the control of the Communist Party and emboldened reform movements across the Eastern Bloc. 2. Revolutions in Central and Eastern Europe. Poland. The Solidarity Movement, a trade union and social movement, led to semi-free elections in 1989 and the eventual end of communist rule. Hungary. Hungary began liberalizing its political system and opened its borders with Austria, facilitating the exodus of East Germans to the West. East Germany. Mass protests led to the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989, and the eventual reunification of Germany. Other countries. Similar peaceful transitions occurred in Bulgaria and Romania, although Romania's transition was more violent with the overthrow and execution of Nicolae Ceausescu. 3. Soviet Union dissolution. Internal reforms. Gorbachev's policies faced resistance within the Soviet Union, leading to economic hardship and political instability. Republics declare independence. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, declared independence, followed by other Soviet republics. August coup. A failed coup by hardline communists in August 1991 accelerated the collapse. Official dissolution. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned and the Soviet Union was officially dissolved the following day. Connection to the concept of the nation-state. 1. Self-determination. The Velvet Revolution and similar movements emphasized the right of nations to self-determination, leading to the establishment of sovereign nation-states. These events underscored the importance of national identity and the desire for governance that reflects the will of the people. Number 2. Peaceful transitions. The largely peaceful nature of the Velvet Revolution demonstrated that significant political change could be achieved without widespread violence. This set a precedent for other peaceful transitions to democracy and influenced later movements, such as those seen during the Arab Spring. Number 3. Democratic governance. The transition from authoritarian communist regimes to democratic systems in Central and Eastern Europe reinforced the principles of democratic governance and human rights. These principles became integral to the modern understanding of the nation-state, emphasizing the importance of political freedom, rule of law, and representative government. Conclusion. The Velvet Revolution was a pivotal event in the collapse of Soviet influence in Central Europe and contributed to the broader dissolution of the Soviet Union. It highlighted the power of peaceful protest and the desire for democratic governance and national self-determination. These events significantly influenced the modern concept of the nation-state, emphasizing the principles of sovereignty, democracy, and the right of peoples to determine their own political destiny. Including the revolutions previously discussed and the additional ones mentioned, we now have a total of 18 significant revolutions. 1. American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. 2. French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. 3. Russian Revolution, 1917. 4. Velvet Revolution, 1989. 5. Arab Spring, 2010-2012. 6. Tiananmen Square protests, 1989. 7. Hong Kong pro-democracy movements, 2014 and 2019 to 2020. 8. French Revolution of 1830, July Revolution. Additional revolutions. 9. Glorious Revolution, 1688. 10. Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804. 11. Revolutions of 1848. 12. Mexican War of Independence, 1810 to 1821. 13. Chinese Revolution, 1911. 14. Cuban Revolution, 1953 to 1959. 15. Iranian Revolution, 1979. 16. Portuguese Carnation Revolution, 1974. 17. Spanish Transition to Democracy, 1975 to 1982. 18. Philippine People Power Revolution, 1986. These revolutions cover a wide range of historical periods and geographic regions, each contributing to significant political, social, and economic changes in their respective contexts. Including the revolutions previously discussed and the additional ones mentioned, we now have a total of 18 significant revolutions. 1. American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. 2. French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. 3. Russian Revolution, 1917. 4. Velvet Revolution, 1989. 5. Arab Spring, 2010-2012. 6. Tiananmen Square protests, 1989. 7. Hong Kong pro-democracy movements, 2014 and 2019 to 20. The Glorious Revolution, along with earlier revolutions, significantly contributed to the evolution of the concept of the nation-state by establishing key principles of governance, sovereignty, and individual rights. Here's how the Glorious Revolution and prior revolutions played a role. Glorious Revolution, 1688. Contribution to the concept of the nation-state. 1. Constitutional monarchy. The Glorious Revolution established the principle of constitutional monarchy in England. It limited the powers of the monarchy and ensured that the king or queen could not govern without the consent of Parliament. The Bill of Rights 1689 codified these changes, stipulating that the monarchy could not suspend laws, levy taxes, or maintain a standing army without Parliament's approval. 2. Sovereignty of law. This revolution underscored the supremacy of law over the will of the monarch, reinforcing the idea that the state should be governed by a set of laws applicable to all, including the ruler. It also reinforced the principle that sovereignty resides not in the person of the monarch, but in the governed populace and its representatives. 3. Individual rights. The Bill of Rights also protected certain individual liberties, such as freedom from arbitrary arrest and cruel and unusual punishment. These ideas influenced later developments in the understanding of individual rights within the nation-state framework. Earlier revolutions and their contributions. 1. English Civil War, 1642 to 1651. Parliamentary sovereignty. This conflict between the monarchy and parliament emphasized the role of representative government and set the stage for the constitutional changes brought by the Glorious Revolution. Checks and balances. It highlighted the need for checks and balances between different branches of government, influencing later democratic structures. 2. Dutch Revolt, 1568 to 1648. Religious freedom and republicanism. The successful revolt against Spanish rule led to the establishment of the Dutch Republic, emphasizing religious tolerance and a republican form of government. Economic independence. It showcased the importance of economic independence and self-governance, contributing to the modern notion of the nation-state. 3. American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. Democratic ideals. It introduced the concept of a democratic republic where sovereignty resides with the people and their elected representatives. Federalism. The U.S. Constitution established a federal system that balanced power between national and state governments, influencing future nation-state structures. 4. French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. Popular sovereignty. It furthered the idea that sovereignty lies with the nation's people rather than a monarch. Human rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen outlined fundamental human rights and the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which became cornerstones of modern nation-states. 5. Haitian Revolution, 1791-1804. Abolition of slavery. It was the first successful slave revolt, leading to the establishment of an independent state, highlighting the principles of human dignity and self-determination. Anti-colonialism. It inspired anti-colonial movements and the idea that colonial territories could become sovereign nation-states. Conclusion. The Glorious Revolution and earlier revolutions collectively contributed to the evolution of the modern nation-state by establishing principles of constitutional governance, sovereignty of the people, rule of law, and protection of individual rights. Each of these revolutions played a pivotal role in shaping the political, legal, and social frameworks that define the contemporary nation-state. They influenced how states are structured, how power is distributed, and how citizens' rights are protected within the state.